Michael Landon read his son's suicide note when America's most beloved TV father's heart shattered forever. The single sentence written there would change Michael forever. Dad, you were always everyone else's father. The man who had been a father to thousands of children on the Little House set had never heard his own son's silent scream at home. But this was just the beginning of a tragedy that would reveal the devastating price of being America's dad. To understand the magnitude of what destroyed Michael Landon, you have to understand what Mark Fraser Landon meant to his father. Mark wasn't just Michael's son. He was his redemption, his second chance, his proof that despite his own troubled childhood, he could break the cycle and be the father he never had. Michael Landon grew up as Eugene Orowitz in a household where love was conditional and attention was scarce. His father was distant, his mother was demanding, and young Eugene learned early that performance was the price of acceptance. When he became Michael Landon, when he became Charles Ingalls, he swore he would never repeat those mistakes with his own children. Mark was born in 1976, during the height of Little House on the Prairie's success. Michael was at the pinnacle of his career, beloved by millions as the gentle, wise father figure who always had time for his children's problems, who always knew the right thing to say, who never lost his temper or his patience. But there's a cruel irony in playing the perfect father on television. The cameras demand so much of your time, your energy, your emotional reserves, that sometimes there's nothing left for the people who need you most. Michael would spend 14 hours a day on the Little House set, solving fictional family problems, dispensing wisdom to child actors, being the father figure that America craved. Then he would come home exhausted, drained, with nothing left to give to his own children. Mark would wait by the window for his father to come home, but when Michael finally walked through that door, he was too tired to be anything but a shadow of Charles Ingalls. The first signs of trouble appeared when Mark was in high school. He started acting out, getting into fights, drinking, staying out all night. Michael, who could solve any problem in 44 minutes of television time, was baffled by his own son's rebellion. He tried the Charles Ingalls approach, long talks about responsibility, about making good choices, about being a man. But Mark wasn't looking for a lecture. He was looking for a father. Dad talks to me like I'm one of his TV kids, Mark confided to a friend. He gives me these speeches about life and morality, but he doesn't really see me. He sees another Little House episode. Michael was oblivious to his son's pain. He was too busy being America's dad to notice that his own child was drowning. When Mark's grades started slipping, Michael hired tutors. When Mark got arrested for underage drinking, Michael used his influence to make it go away. But he never asked the one question that might have saved his son's life. What's wrong? What do you need from me? The distance between father and son grew wider as Mark entered his 20s. While Michael was busy with new television projects, Mark was struggling with depression, with feelings of inadequacy, with the impossible burden of being the son of a man who was everybody's perfect father except his own. Mark tried to follow in his father's footsteps, taking small acting jobs, but he was always compared to Michael Landon. He wasn't charismatic enough, wasn't handsome enough, wasn't talented enough. Every audition was a reminder that he would never measure up to his father's legacy. The weight of being Michael Landon's son became unbearable. In the spring of 1991, Mark's depression deepened into something darker. He began talking about feeling invisible, about being a disappointment, about how everyone expected him to be like his famous father. His friends noticed the changes, the mood swings, the increasingly desperate tone in his conversations. But Michael was busy producing and directing, living in the bubble of television success, completely unaware that his son was planning to end his life. The call came on May 11, 1991. Michael was in his study reviewing scripts when the phone rang. The voice on the other end was calm, professional, devastating. "Mr. Landon, this is Detective Morrison with the LAPD. I'm sorry to inform you that your son Mark was found deceased in his apartment this morning. It appears to be a self-inflicted gunshot wound." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. He dropped the phone, staggered backward, and for the first time in his adult life, Charles Ingalls couldn't find the right words, couldn't make sense of what was happening, couldn't fix what was broken. When Michael arrived at Mark's apartment, the scene was more devastating than any drama he had ever directed. His 24-year-old son was gone, and scattered around the room were newspaper clippings about Michael's success, awards, magazine covers celebrating America's favorite TV dad. It was as if Mark had surrounded himself with reminders of everything he could never be. But it was the suicide note that destroyed Michael completely. 3 pages of pain, of feeling invisible, of growing up in the shadow of a man who belonged to everyone except his own family. The most devastating line was simple and heartbreaking. "Dad, you were always everyone else's father. I just wanted you to be mine." Michael read that note over and over, each word cutting deeper than the last. He realized that while he had spent decades perfecting the art of being a television father, he had failed at the most important role of his life, being a real father to his own son. The funeral was a surreal mixture of private grief and public spectacle. Hundreds of people came to pay their respects to Michael Landon's son, but Michael could barely function. He stood at the graveside in dark sunglasses, not to look cool, but to hide eyes that were destroyed by guilt and regret. During the service, Michael was asked to speak about his son. He stood at the podium, looked out at the crowd, and for several long moments said nothing. Finally, in a voice broken by grief, he said, "Mark was a good boy who deserved a better father than me. I spent so much time being everyone else's dad that I forgot to be his." The guilt consumed Michael like cancer. He would sit in Mark's room for hours, reading the suicide note, torturing himself with questions that had no answers. What if he had paid more attention? What if he had been home more? What if he had seen the signs? Friends and family tried to comfort him, telling him it wasn't his fault, that Mark's depression was an illness, that no one could have predicted this tragedy. But Michael knew better. He had the evidence in his son's own handwriting. "You were always everyone else's father." The irony was crushing. Michael Landon had built his entire career on being the perfect father figure, the wise patriarch who always knew how to help his children through their problems. But when his own son needed him most, Michael had been too busy playing that role for television audiences to notice the crisis happening in his own home. Michael's career began to suffer as the guilt ate away at him. He would forget lines, miss appointments, lose his temper on set. The man who had been known for his professionalism and his even temperament became unpredictable and difficult to work with. He was grieving not just the loss of his son, but the loss of his identity as a good father. In interviews after Mark's death, Michael was brutally honest about his failures. "I thought I was this great dad because I played one on TV," he said. "But playing a father and being a father are 2 completely different things. I learned that too late." The tragedy changed Michael forever. He became obsessed with trying to be a better father to his remaining children, but the damage to his psyche was irreversible. He had spent his entire adult life believing he was a good man, a good father, a positive influence on families across America. Mark's suicide note shattered all of those beliefs. Michael Landon died of liver cancer just months after Mark's suicide, and many of his friends believed that the grief accelerated his decline. He had lost the will to fight, lost the belief in his own goodness that had sustained him throughout his career. At Michael's funeral, his daughter Jennifer spoke about the father she had known. "After Mark died, Dad changed. He spent his last months trying to make up for all the time he had missed with us, but he never forgave himself for losing Mark." The legacy of Michael Landon is complicated by this tragedy. He gave millions of families an ideal to aspire to, a model of patient, loving fatherhood. But in his own home, he failed to live up to that ideal when it mattered most. Mark's suicide note stands as a heartbreaking reminder that the most important audience for any father is not the millions watching on television, but the children waiting for him at home. Michael Landon's story is a cautionary tale about the price of perfection, about the danger of becoming so invested in an image that you lose sight of reality. He was America's dad, but he forgot to be Mark's dad, and that failure, written in his son's own hand, haunted him until his last breath.